All right, folks, welcome back to this series of student interviews that are being run with Knowable World students. Mikaela, you might remember from our series on Chinese history, and she's back to do Japanese history for us. So we're going to dive right in here. And Mikaela, let's get us started where we always should start, which is by setting the context for our expose, for our inquiry here. And that consists of making sure that we know what kind of world it is we're talking about and that we're trying to learn about. Because at Knowable World, history is the revelation and explanation of the world we live in. We don't study topics as fragments. We don't study them separately. We don't study them as if they're just these self-contained stories. Clearly, what many of you are going to see today is that there are a lot of connections, for instance, between Japanese history and Chinese history, Japanese history and European history, Japanese history and American history. So the world we live in is this web of connectivity between cultures. And so that's what we do at Knowable World is we start immediately by saying, the world we live in is. Let's go ahead and set the context, Mikaela.
The world we live in is an interconnected agglomeration of nearly 200 countries that can be broken up into 10 major cultural blocks, 5 of which are cardinal cultures, in which the United States has primacy.
Okay, so when we did Chinese history, we immediately identified that China is one of those cardinal cultures, one of those ones that have the will and the way to truly deflect the course of history in our time. Where does Japan stand within that hierarchy of the 200, the 10, the 5, and the one with the primacy? Where is Japan in that picture?
Japan is a major culture, which means that it is significant enough that we have to pay special attention to it and that it has an impact on the world, but it is not a cardinal culture. And a cardinal culture is a culture that has both the will and capability to change the world.
Okay, right. So Japan, therefore, does not, because Japan today is what kind of culture?
Japan is post-imperial, which means it militarily, it has the capability to change the world if it wanted to, but because it is post-imperial and therefore it lacks a defined set of cultural answers, it does not have the will to change the world.
Okay, you said something very interesting there. It does not possess a definite set of cultural answers. Being post something is this framework that we use in Knowable World. We used it in relation to China. We refer to China as being post-Maoist, meaning that China used to have Maoism as a guiding ideology, very intensive and brutal ideology, which failed so miserably that it had to be abandoned by Deng Xiaoping and later rulers. Now, Japan, you're saying, is post-imperial. Clearly, post means after, okay, imperial. So Japan indeed used to be an imperial culture. We're not going to dive into that right at this very moment, but of course, most people could use perhaps a little bit of a boost with that. When was Japan an imperial culture? How could Americans, for instance, just get their minds wrapped around that idea?
Before and during World War II. Specifically, our anchor fact that we use for that is 1937 to 45, which is World War II in Asia rather than World War II in Europe. And that actually, we use that fact because of Japan. Japan in 1937 invaded China to try and make them part of their empire, therefore beginning World War II, a conflict that would later relate to World War II.
In Asia, right? There you go. It's 2 conflicts that all wrap up into one because of the alliance of Japan and Germany. Okay, good. So, post-imperial. Let's talk a little bit more about that because Japan today is a culture that does lack a definite set of answers. How can people see that? When most people think of Japan, they think of high tech. Japan is the land of Sony and Lexus and high-speed trains. It's an impressive place. It's got a very high standard of living, very high life expectancy. What could be wrong with that? Actually, that picture perhaps is more complicated. How do we see post-imperialism as a cultural trait in Japan today?
We see it manifesting in Japan's tendency towards insularity, which is meaning that they keep to themselves. They are very apprehensive towards foreigners. They have a very low immigration rate. They have very strict immigration laws, and that is displayed in their shrinking population. In most modern countries today, there's a shrinking population of native people who currently live in them, but that is masked by immigration. Immigration offsets that and keeps these numbers from shrinking. Because Japan has so little immigration, we can see that Japan is already shrinking and has already begun to shrink by a significant amount.